Hello Gaspé, welcome back to Black Whale Cooking. Sous-chef Andrew here. Today we're doing the recipe for the long-awaited Cipaille, an old favorite. We'll be using pork and moose meat, but you can use any other meats that you want. I highly recommend though that you get some wild game for this recipe. So we're gonna be taking our dough, rolling it out and putting it in 3 layers. And then in those layers we'll be putting our seasoned meat mix, our vegetables, and topping it off with a mix of stock and wine to cook it all together in those juices and really get our flavors mixing together. This one's a bit of a longer cook, but it's well worth the wait, and it can be made in batches in advance and frozen. Let's get started. Camps are opened again in the woods up the streams, and iron pots bubble on open fires. Though the days are warm, you are glad to snuggle down in your sleeping bags, cozy and warm in the cool of the night. The smell of coffee and bacon wake you in the morning. For the keen hunter, there are still deer and moose to be seen, and if you can bear to pull the trigger, they supply plentiful meat for the larder. Caribou, moose, and bear were staples in the fare of the early settlers. Alright, so we're going to start with our spice blend to get that ready. And here we have some lovely products from the coast. Here we have some cedar branches from Gaspesian Sauvage. We're going to take 2 or 3 branches and put it in our pestle. And we're going to use that in a second. Our next product from Gaspesian Sauvage is our balsam fir branch, which is another tree. This is really going to help to give the boreal and forestral taste to our meat if you don't have the wild game meat on hand. So here, again, this part's optional. We're going to torch the branches to really get some of those aromas out since these are dried spices. So it's a quick torch to basically light them on fire a bit. And now we're going to crush them with our pestle. Again, whatever fat or essential oils are in these leaves are really going to come out now and mix in with the rest of our dried spices. Next, we're gonna add some of our garlic powder. These would be considered just base spices to enhance most seasonings. Here we're going to add some powdered ginger. It wouldn't be considered classic, but it's really going to go far to enhance the taste and smells of the tree branches we put in there. As most meat pies from the coast have, a little bit of sweetness, so we have our cinnamon powder we're going to be adding in here as well. Some rosemary leaves. If you have fresh, it's certainly better, but dried it always works in a pinch, and we're going to crush that up as well. Next, add some dried thyme as well. Again, about a tablespoon. And lastly, our freshly grated nutmeg. This is the one spice I'd recommend not using in dried format, as the freshly grated nutmeg is 10 times richer and almost a completely different ingredient altogether. So I'm taking my microplane or any type of grater you have. It could work. I'm gonna put in about half a nutmeg seed in for all of this meat pie. And here we have our spice mix. You feel free that whatever large pieces of branch have remained in your mortar, we can put into our wine that we're later going to heat up. Into our spice mix, it's important to include salt and pepper into the base mix, as it will help with even seasoning everywhere. Salt is always used as an overall flavor enhancer in almost all foods, and pepper is used more like a spice, like the rest of our spices, where it's going to add some of that earthy notes which go really well with all of our boreal flavors and the wild moose that I'm using today. And always give it a taste to see if the spice mix is what you want. Oh, that's good. All right, now that we have our seasoning mix prepared, it's time to start cutting up our meat. Here I'm gonna start with the pork. This is just a regular pork loin or pork roast. The cut of meat is not really important since this is more of a stewing recipe, so any tougher meat will have time to cook down. So I'm just gonna start by cutting this meat in half to see if there is any tough muscles that we might have to remove. And as you can see in this one, there is. The good thing we cut it. We don't really want to keep any of this white rubbery substance, because It's like a tendon or just pure muscle tissue that will not break down no matter how much cooking we give it. So we're definitely better off getting rid of it first. It's always worth the time to just take a second to think about the meat you're using or any kind of product you're using and how you want to be using it. So it's really easy to clean. I'm just going to put my knife underneath this white strip while holding it, and then just give it a quick cut like this. And then you can see my white strip is completely off with a little bit of lost meat. That's fine. I'd much rather lose this meat than to be chewing on this all night. So just gonna put that aside for now and do the same thing to the other side. Again, I'm just going to put my knife underneath that white flap and cut across slowly to not pull the knife toward myself. And now we've gotten rid of the undesirable muscle tissue. And as I feel it, I feel there's a difference between this white flesh and the other connective tissue. This is a little more malleable. As you can see, it's almost pulling apart my fingers. That's just a bit of fat tissue, it's fine. So we're gonna start cutting it in cubes. Again, there's nothing really important about cutting the meat. We're just cutting it into small bite-sized cubes like you would a ragu, as everything is going to be eaten together with a fork or a spoon. You see the size of my cuts. And as I'm cutting also, I'll see if there's any other tissue. Like this, there's a little more connective tissue here that I felt with my knife, I'm just going to get rid of. And the rest can go into my bowl to be seasoned later. And you even want a little bit of extra fat from whatever cuts of meat to get mixed in there as well, as that'll help increase flavor and give it a really nice melty texture as well, as the fat will melt. And now for the star of this recipe is our moose meat that a friend was so nice to gift me. Here I'm going to take a little more attention to look for any connective muscle tissue, as a wild animal is going to have a lot more developed muscles as opposed to a farm-raised animal. So you can see there's a lot more silver skin, and you can definitely tell the difference when looking at the piece of meat, as it almost has like a reflective rainbow shine similar to oil on water. It'll always look drastically different to the rest of your meat. So now that you can look at it, I'm just going to cut it up in cubes like I did the pork. So now that we have our proteins cut up, we're just going to take our seasoning mix that we prepared so delicately and sprinkle all of it on top. This may seem like a lot of seasoning. It is absolutely normal, because this spice has to season our entire cipaille. That includes the dough, the liquid, and the vegetables. I'm just going to take a spoon or a spatula and give that a nice mix. You really want to season this meat as far ahead as possible, even overnight, to get the most effect. And this way the seasonings will really imbibe and get inside of our meat. And also some of that salt will draw out some of the moisture in the meat, creating almost a paste texture by the end. Now I'm going to set this aside and start prepping the rest of our recipe. All right, starting with our vegetables, we'll be taking our carrots and giving them a quick peel. Unless you're lucky enough to have carrots from a farm, then you only have to rinse them. It's better to peel all of your carrots at once before you start cutting them, as it's always more efficient to complete one task before moving to another, as opposed to going back and forth. And now we're looking for cubes or a dice about half the size of our meat. And so I'm gonna start by taking off both tips. I'll cut my carrot in half to make it more manageable. And again in half, so we have these carrots cut in half vertically. And I'm just going to line them up and start slicing down. Notice they don't have to be perfect cubes, just it's really more important about the size than it is the shape of the cut. When preparing any food in general, always think about how you are going to be eating it and how you want it to fit in your fork, spoon, or how's it going to be served, how are you eating it. These are the main aspects to cooking for yourself or for others. Anytime you ask yourself these questions, you'll almost intrinsically know the answer to how you want to cut it or prepare it. Here we have our diced carrots. Put them in a separate container, as we will be mixing all of our vegetables together before layering it into the pie. Now we come to the onions to do the same thing. I'm going to be taking a smaller knife to peel my onions. Just to take off the bottoms and tops first. Ideally, we always leave a little bit of that bottom root on the onion. It helps keep the onion layers together while we're cutting it. Before taking the skin off, I'll cut it in half to make it easier for myself. I'll grab a corner with my knife, in between my knife and my thumb, and then slowly peel back. And you see it'll come off almost in one whole piece. And everything holds together thanks to that root. The basic dice of an onion is you do a couple slices horizontally into the onion. Again, your hand always stays above, away from your knife, and you move forward in pulling motions as opposed to trying to push to the back of the onion. You want to pull the knife slowly towards you, and that's what's going to give you a greater sense of control and avoid the chance of pushing the knife through your hand. After I have my slices, I'm going to cut vertically now, and that will create like a grid through my onion. And then I just pass my knife through as I was slicing the carrots before. And perfect dice. Now we're going to take our 3 or 4 cloves of garlic, depending on the size. So there's often 2 ways to using garlic. You can peel each bulb individually until it has no more of the outer skin. Or you can take the side of your knife, place the individual garlic clove flat, and give a tap to the spine of the knife to not to cut yourself. Small tap like that will give it a kind of crush it and give it a crack, which lets you just peel it off smoothly every time. Now you'll see if your garlic gets a little bit older, there's a little tip here. That would be the garlic's germ, which you want to remove. So you cut your garlic in half, just remove the little sprout. This is often what will cause people to get indigestion or upset stomachs from garlic. And now I'm actually going to dice my garlic like I did the onion. So the same thing, be slicing it horizontally and vertically before I give it a couple passes with my knife. As I don't want any larger chunks of garlic. I really want to have the garlic more as a flavoring to be well dispersed everywhere. Next is the potatoes. This is what's really going to add a lot of the filling or the filler to the dish. I'd say most potatoes, you definitely want to peel the potatoes regardless of what kind or how fresh they are, as we don't want any of those extra earth flavors to start competing with all the other spices. Once we peel and cut potatoes, we won't have to put them in water as we'll be using them shortly after cutting them. Now we have our potatoes peeled, it's time to cut them up in the dice. Same thing as before, we're going to just cut them down in slices and cut them about the same size as our carrots earlier. Put them in with the rest of our vegetables. So now that we have our veggies cut, before we start rolling out our dough, let's get our cooking liquids warmed up first. So we have our wine, white wine, so that way it doesn't hide the colors of all of our food, and our chicken stock, which you can replace for any stock you desired. And notice how I have put the branches or leftover bits of tree branches inside of my stock to infuse as well, to make sure I get all of that flavor. Now I'm just gonna set it on the fire while we roll our dough. Now it's time to roll out our dough. If you haven't been following the rest of the black whale cooking videos, you'll see that in episode 1 I showed you guys how to do a pot brisée. We are using the same recipe for this dough, except I personally changed some of my flour out for rye flour. So it's the same cold short crust pastry dough. We're going to roll it out to do our layers. Flouring my work surface to stop any of the slowly melting butter from sticking down, and flouring the top along my rolling pin. You want it about a 1/4 inch thick, or about 1 centimeter or 2. Keeping in mind the size and shape of the pan that you're using. I will be using a baking dish, so I'm going to go for a rectangular shape. Every time I give it a couple swipes, I'm moving the dough around to make sure it's not sticking, and adding a little bit more flour as needed. I'm not worried about the exact shape, as I can cut off any excess that there is. So now that we have our meat mix seasoned with our spices, our vegetables cut, and our dough rolled out, and our cooking liquid's hot, it's finally time to start layering that pie. I'm gonna start by giving a couple spritz of oil feel free to use a can of Pam to oil up the base of my container so that the bottom won't stick. So that'd be terrible to put all this time and effort just to have a stuck pie and not be able to eat it on a plate. Start by taking the smallest of our 3 sheets, putting it to line the bottom. I make my pie more like a casserole, so as opposed to lining the entire side to do one complete pie, I do mine like a casserole of layered meat, vegetables, and dough. So just line the bottom. And now I'm going to be adding first my vegetables on that first bottom layer. Be sure to pre-mix this mix of vegetables, make mounting your pie easier. Now the reason we're putting our vegetables on the bottom instead of the meat is so that way when the meat starts to cook, all the liquid and fat from the meats will melt onto our vegetables and also flavor up that dough and vegetables. So an even layer of vegetables throughout our bottom layer. Give it and pat it down slightly. You're going to want to make sure you use about half of your total vegetable mix here. We're going to be flattening it down. And now we're doing the same thing with half of our meat mix. So give it one final mix to mix in our spices with whatever water may have been pulled out of our meat. You can already see that your meat should have changed color ever so slightly, as well have a bit of moisture in the bottom of your bowl. So now half our meat's going in. Same thing in an even layer. And now we'll be adding our next layer of dough on top of our meat. And now, like a lasagna, we'll be pushing it down ever so slightly to make sure everything is compact and will hold together, and we'll start again. So the rest of our vegetables, the rest of our meat, and now at this point you should really realize why we've added so much salt into our meat mix, is because that's seasoning up the rest of these vegetables with all of that salty juice from the meat and the stock. And now our final layer of dough to cover everything up. A real secret to Cipaille and having everything beautifully cooked and seasoned together is to pierce a hole in your dough like you would a terrine mix. So I'm going to poke a hole with a skewer, chopstick, or a straw right to the bottom without piercing that bottom dough. So you'll feel the difference. When you finally tap that bottom, you stop without pushing all the way through. Pull up, and I'll take a small funnel and place it inside that hole. And this is where we'll be pouring our cooking liquids. That way, make sure that one, your cooking liquid doesn't pour over the sides of your cooking pan and beside your pie as opposed to inside of it. And make sure to get right to the bottom so that way all that meat can start braising inside of that dough. So our top dough still has the chance to become crispy at the end of the cooking process, as opposed to just wet and soggy. This may seem like a lot of liquid, but you want to come up just about to the top dough, just under the top dough. Don't worry, all this like extra thick dough is going to imbibe most of these juices and mix with the spices to make almost like a sauce-like consistency. So now we have our cooking liquids inside of our pie. We're going to cover it with aluminum foil to prevent this dough from burning over the 1 to 2 hour cooking process. We'll be moving it about half or 3/4 of the way through to finish the cooking and have a nice crispy outer crust. We're finally ready. Into the oven at 350 degrees we go. We'll see you back here in an hour. Now it's time to clean up. So an hour has passed. Now it's time to check on our pie. You can already hear those juices sizzling. Don't be alarmed by the fact that it looks like a soggy mess right now. Now that we've taken the cover off, it's going to crisp up just fine in the oven. Whatever remaining juices are still in the bottom of the pan are going to dry up and evaporate now that we remove the cover. It's time to put this back in the oven for about a half an hour or 45 minutes to crisp up the crust and finish our cooking. All right, the wait's finally over. Here is our wild game cipaille. It's not the traditional 6 layers, but nor do we have a family of 17 to feed anymore. Today, I'm gonna be serving this with Pierre du Moulin by Pit Caribou. It is their rendition of a Scotch ale, or as known in Scotland, a wee heavy. It is a strong ale with resinous notes of herbs, flowers, and a little bit of woodiness. It's going to pair wonderfully with this fall dish. Cheers.